conversation, as you all know, will focus on the logistics and distribution industry, which has seen a lot of growth over the last decade. A matter of fact, I believe our county is home to about 16 major distribution centers that distribute various products and occupy about 4.2 million square feet. Our Economic Development Board has seen great activity and has courted a lot of these companies either through an expansion or a relocation. One of the reasons we believe why we are seeing great growth in the industry is due to the ability to move people and products efficiently through either air, sea, rail, land networks in our South Florida region. And with access to 3 ports, 3 airports, I-95, the Turnpike, Tri-Rail, CSX, and FEC, to name a few, coupled with a growing population in South Florida, this region remains an attractive location to those in logistics and distribution. And I would tell you that even since COVID, if you look at the BDB's pipeline right now, we have, and we are courting 2 very large distribution centers. So to strategically address the needs of the industry and to keep all of the players locally connected, the Business Development Board has this logistics and distribution task force that meets quarterly. It's staffed by our Senior Vice President, Gary Hines, and is chaired by Larry Hotz, who's the Marketing Director for one of the largest distribution centers in our county, Woodfield Distribution in Boca Raton. Again, I thank all of you for joining us. Larry, we thank you for your leadership of this task force. You've done an outstanding job, and I'm going to turn it over to you to moderate this morning's discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly, and I thank you for your leadership at the Business Development Board and the great work that you do. I do want to mention also, Gary, Kirsten for helping organize this, and Robert Rhino also, who I work with closely. So thank you very much for this forum. And good morning, everyone. We've got a lot to cover in the next hour or so because this is such a big topic, and there are a lot of important aspects to our discussion this morning. So we're going to get right to it, and I'm going to introduce our one of our keynote speakers, Kevin Tebow, who's the Secretary of the Florida Department of Transportation. Kevin served in his post since January 2019. He's active in the deployment of transportation technology. That's one of his passions. Comes from the private sector as a consulting engineer before joining FDOT about 16 years ago, rising to his current position. So what I'd like to do is just start this off generally and kick this off by asking you, Secretary Tebow, if you could provide an overview of the state and the FDOT response to COVID-19 and the programs that you're spearheading, including your rail safety your rail safety initiative and other programs that benefit our citizens.
All right. Well, thank you, Larry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today, and hopefully it's a beautiful day for where you're at today. Just wanted to cover a couple of things that Larry just mentioned, the state's response, and especially FDOT's response to COVID-19. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the governor and the Department of Health even today continue to monitor the COVID-19 pandemic very carefully, and the DOT remains ready to support them in any way we are asked to do so by the governor. Beginning in March, the department assisted our brethren there at the Department of Health on a number of different executive orders, and we will continue to do those as well. We have people at the Emergency Operations Center that is helping support this pandemic, as we are still at a level 1 statewide because of the emergency order that was issued by the governor. Also in March, and Manny could attest to this, the department began teleconference calls with our passenger seaports and public use airports regarding their operations. These calls are continuing on a bi-weekly basis. Actually, we had our last one yesterday. And I have visited many of the airports and seaports, including Manny. I guess it was about a month ago.
Yep.
Some in person and some virtually across the state to have more personalized conversation about the pandemic's impact to their facility. For example, on Monday, I actually had conversations with Port Everglades and the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. At this time, all the DOT facilities, the buildings, I should say, you know, the offices remain closed to the public. And at one point, especially in late March, early April, we had over 60% of the department's employees that were teleworking. Now, clearly, a good portion of our workforce do not have the ability to telework because of the activities that they do, whether they be maintenance individuals or operational individuals that have to be out in the field. But where we had the opportunity to, and we've actually thanked them numerous times, our IT staff for quickly getting this implemented in this telework environment, and it's actually worked quite well for the agency. Within the past few weeks, we've begun some initial phases of a return to the office plan by putting it together at different locations. And we recognize that each location is a little different. The Panhandle District and the offices there will have a different response plan than the offices that are down in District 4 in Fort Lauderdale or the offices that are in Jacksonville. So we made sure that when we developed the return to the office plan that we recognize what are the data points showing us and what is going on in the area. But we remain focused on our mission and continue to advance transportation through virtual interactions like this and meetings with our partners. And in some cases, we accelerated some project timelines, and I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the things that I continue to hear over the last several weeks is about the department's funding. As many of you know, in June, the governor signed the state budget for fiscal year 2021. The budget total over $92 billion and provides over $350 million in tax relief. As relates to DOT, the budget provided $9.2 billion for the state transportation work program, which is just the first year of the work program, including $2.5 billion for highway construction, over $400 million for aviation improvements, over $800 million for rail transit projects, and over $230 million just for safety initiatives alone. Since the start of the pandemic, the department has been prudent with our funding and our budget, and we continue to practice mindful spending. I challenge the teams in a number of ways to identify opportunities that we could potentially reduce costs while furthering our efforts to improve safety, increase mobility, leverage innovative solutions to advance our overall transportation system. Now, we understand that our revenues will obviously fall short than what we had forecasted, and that's especially over the last several months. But what we do not know is if this revenue drop has bottomed out yet and what the short-term versus the long-term impacts may be. As many of you know, a lot of what we do in our forecasting and revenues work together with the legislative economists. They are meeting actually later this month and beginning of next month that look at those forecasts. And so once we have that ability to review that information, we'll be able to make any adjustments that we need to make to our program. But we all are being ready for the eventual reduction of some level of the gas tax revenue, which obviously many of you know pays the big part of what we fund and as relates to transportation. But regardless of that, we also were trending that gas tax, as I mentioned, is our primary source of revenue. But if we know where vehicles are going, and Larry, you alluded a little bit to that in my bio about innovation and technology, we all know that autonomous connected vehicles, electric vehicles will become an increasing part of our system here in the state and throughout the country. And so when we rely on a revenue source that's primarily based upon consumption of motor fuel, we're going to have a problem in the long term. So we continue to look at ways that we can start to look at how we maximize the revenues that we have based upon that revenue location, and also be mindful of the fact that we need to prepare for these new vehicles as they come online. I'm sure many of you saw recently General Motors issued, I think it was their CEO, issued their new product line coming out in the next few years. And if you notice, there were several vehicles, including in the Cadillac brand, if you can believe it, that were all going to be electric vehicles. So you can see that the shift is happening, just like we saw the shift happening a number of years ago when the gas prices were very high on more fuel efficient vehicles. So we're starting to see that paradigm shift as well. Larry, you alluded to a little bit about safety update. I know many of you in Palm Beach County were very familiar with a significant railroad grade crossing issue that we had towards the end of last calendar year. One of the things that frustrated me the most was a lot of people pointing fingers and no one stepping up and taking charge and taking responsibility in how we can improve safety in all aspects of our transportation system, not only on the highway, but on the rail and every other mode. And so last December, I announced a statewide rail safety initiative to aid in the prevention of fatalities on or near rail crossings throughout Florida. That includes both an engineering and an educational element. Those of you who are familiar with safety on our transportation system know that it's not only engineering that can help with these solutions, it takes other aspects as well, including education and enforcement to be truly successful. So we created Operation STRIDE, S-T-R-I-D-E, which stands for Statewide Traffic and Railroad Initiative Using Dynamic Envelopes. Here at the DOT, we like our acronyms. So on the local front, the DOT has been coordinating with all the local municipalities and counties on the implementation of these dynamic envelopes at crossings on the South Florida Rail Corridor, or Tri-Rail. To date, we have let to contract 3 contracts, and 2 of them have been already executed. Dynamic envelopes will be implemented at 66 crossings through our Operation STRIDE program in Palm Beach County, at railroads at the FEC Railroad, the Tri-Rail Corridor, as well as CSX crossings. Construction is anticipated to start in next month, in August 2020. The one location has already been completed in Palm Beach through another project that we're able to add that work as part of that construction project. And I believe it was at MLK Boulevard, Inlet Boulevard. Additionally, we're also working with the Virgin Trains group for them to implement at 25 other locations throughout the county. One of the things I just mentioned earlier was during the COVID crisis, under the direction of the governor, we've been able to seize upon opportunities across the state to accelerate current construction projects. Despite the ongoing crisis, we have not lost focus on the impact transportation has on our state's economy and the opportunity to make a difference and move the needle. And so in District 4, during the month of April, there was a reduction of 45% when compared to historic traffic volumes along Interstate 95, for example. And truck traffic, though, has remained steady because, as many of you know, our trucks were providing critical goods to market, getting medical supplies to our key first providers. And so obviously they provide a much needed opportunity to move goods throughout the area. Today, though, daily traffic volumes are starting to approach levels between 10 to 18% lower. So we are starting to come back up. So that goes back to what I mentioned earlier about our revenues. As we start to see the uptick, we expect we'll see the uptick as well as the gas tax. So we'll let you know when we hear about that. But we were able to accelerate some of the projects currently underway because of the reduced traffic, especially in April and May. And that included the 95 express lanes in Broward and Palm Beach County. We were able to save about 3 weeks of time between those 2 projects. The State Road 80 project from west of Lion Country Safari Road to Forest Hill Boulevard. We were able to accelerate construction by approximately 8 weeks. Now, many asked, what do you mean by that? Is, as you know, many of our projects, we try to maintain current traffic levels as we shift traffic left and right and north and south and so on to be able to build the project. Well, with the reduced traffic volumes, we were able to do longer lane closures. Sometimes we don't need to do it at night, we can do it during the day. And typically when we do things like that, we get better production and we get more work done in that period of time. So it's been very fortunate to be able to do that. Finally, we're able to accelerate the work on State Road 7, US 441 from Atlantic to Point Beach. And again, that saved about a week's time just in that construction duration. There were a number of projects statewide that we were making some significant headway on, and some of that you've probably seen in some of the media announcements that the governor had around that April-May timeframe. And then again, in May, we had another round of advancement of projects. So statewide, we had over 40 projects that were able to get accelerated, and we reduced over 650 total contract days statewide by taking advantage of the reduced traffic on our highways. So regional connections, and I know I got Steve Braun here with some of his team, Lauren and Ann and others, that we understand that across the state, travel patterns will change based upon what has happened from the pandemic. Here we are doing virtual meetings today, and I know some of you have got your fuzzy bunny slippers still on in the morning here with your second cup of coffee. So, but you know, as we see the change, we're gonna see people doing more telework in a permanent sense. So we've told our team to look at how can we start thinking about what those different traffic patterns may be in the future. As we look at maybe reduced volumes of traffic on our roadways, there's been a push in Miami-Dade County, for example, on a greater focus on transit. You know, what does that shift in travel and traffic patterns do as relates to use of transit in some of these major areas? So as we look at long-range planning and visions to possibly revisit decisions that were made based upon assumptions on traffic volumes, you know, we need to take a step back and make sure that the projects that either were under development today or we're planning to do are still the right projects to do based upon what we're seeing in our different areas and parts of the state. So what's really important is that we continue to consider our regional transportation networks as a whole, rather than just focusing on a particular corridor. What are the safety improvements and traffic efficiencies we are trying to accomplish? And what solutions exist to achieve those goals? When we look at it, if we take a regional concept of transportation operations that will increase safety and mobility across the state, we all work together efficiently and effectively to move people and goods here in Florida. And that, at the end of the day, that's our mission statement. But everything comes around, Larry, about partnerships. And it's really important that we have these regional partnerships. They are very, very critical. As Manny can attest to, we've continued to strengthen our partnerships with our modal partners, whether it be at the seaports or the airports or the transit providers. And it starts with communication, always, but especially during this time. It's important to stay in touch with your local district offices and Steve and Jerry O'Reilly and others, and keep them in the loop as you analyze previous project decisions and potentially develop new plans. I want to thank you, Larry, for hosting this. Gary, I know for all your efforts in organizing today's meeting, Kirsten and others, and thanking you for inviting me to participate. I appreciate this opportunity. And I guess I'll turn it back over to you for any questions or how you want to proceed next.
Well, first, thank you very much, Secretary Tebow, for your comments. And I think I know you're going to stay as long as you can with this meeting, but many of the things that you said are central to the discussion that we're going to have today. So I hope to call on you as much as possible throughout the course of this meeting. And the way that, just as a point of order, the way that I'd prefer to handle this is for those who have questions to put it in the comment box and to everybody. And then I will read as many as I can as time allows, before the end of this meeting. And if any of the key speakers have to leave, we'll get the question to them for an answer and get back. So with that, I'd like to, talking about modes of transportation and communication, introduce Manny Almira, the Executive Director of the Port of Palm Beach. For an introduction, more than 35 years in the maritime industry, with the port since 2008. I like that he wants to one day return to Manaus, Brazil to settle down. I guess he's going to be taking a ship to do that. And it's going to be our loss. He was recognized as a power leader last year by the South Florida Business Journal. He's always been a power leader to us, so that was no surprise. Thanks for joining us today, Manny. And I wonder if you could, just following up on Secretary Tebow, explain the port's experience overcoming challenges, supporting your customers, and preparing for the future during this time.
Sure. Thank you. And what a pleasure it is to see all of you, particularly my friend, Secretary Thibault. He's right. We saw each other about maybe a month and a half ago. And as I mentioned before, he's always welcome to come back. So are all of you. Let me start by giving you, let's just say, a 500-foot view of what I see is going on. The Caribbean population is approximately 44 million people. On a good year, there's some estimates out there that the cruise passenger day trips accounted for about 30 million. So you're looking at about 70+ million people that are out there. That is important because the Caribbean really does not have sufficient amount of land to cultivate food. Therefore, they go outside the chain of islands, and a good percentage of that, not the majority, comes out of the United States. We're fortunate in that we are so close to the Caribbean, and there's a rule of thumb in the shipping industry that the closer you are to your trading partner, obviously, that's the ports that are going to be used. In this case, of course, Florida, South Florida, starting from Miami to the south, Port Everglades, and of course ourselves. We, Port Palm Beach, supplies about 50 to 60% of everything that is consumed in the Caribbean. Now that's on a good year, and it's happened all throughout, at least in my career. However, back in March, we were afflicted with this coronavirus, and immediately it impacted not only the port, but the businesses in and around the state of Florida, in some parts of the United States. As an example, I said March because on March 15th is when our cruise ship, the Bahama Paradise Cruise Line, decided to close, meaning they were no longer going to sail, waiting additional information from the CDC. Now, prior to that, and I'm going to give you a couple of numbers. From January to June of 2019, we had a food value of over $560 billion. This is a year ago, basically. We were back in June. However, this year, from January, same time frame, January to June of 2020, we have seen the value, that same value, drop to literally not even half. It's about $98 billion. So you see how the consumption of the cruise passengers have affected the amount of food that gets exported to the Caribbean. And that plays a tremendous, it's one of the biggest components that we have seen since this pandemic started. The latest, not all of it is bad news, but the latest appears to be that the CDC, which from March has closed down any cruise activities throughout the United States. They were going to open it again sometime in the month of July. Just recently we received information that you will no longer, or should I say, you cannot sail until October the 1st. So you see how we're elongating this time span. And that obviously has a negative impact, not only on us, but it has an impact, when I say us, meaning the port, but it has an impact on all the chain link that is involved in this logistics, from rail to trucks to something as local restaurants and local fueling stops are being negatively affected by the inability of this cruise industry to get going back up into Caribbean and other parts of the world. With that, what I also like to remind everyone, if you've seen one of my presentations, of course, the Port of Palm Beach is the #1 port when it comes to exporting food and other materials to the Caribbean. I mentioned food, but others are, for example, miscellaneous cargoes, articles of plastic, frozen meat, and et cetera, et cetera. One of my colleagues, Carl Baker, always asks the question, does anybody know what is the #1 product that we export? And I'll save you the suspense. It's French fries, believe it or not. You ever had a French fry in the Caribbean? It's a very, very good chance it came through the port of Palm Beach. Now, this is where we are, where we're getting, or where we're headed. In my opinion, whether it's October, November, December, or even early next year, the Caribbean will bounce back. There are some pent-up demand from the United States passengers that are willing and able to get back on these ships and go back out to essentially have a vacation and have a great time in and around the Caribbean. Now, that will have an impact down the road. It will be a positive impact for all of us. We should start seeing a bounce back up sometime in the first quarter of calendar 2021. At least I certainly hope so. Other points that I'd just like to briefly touch on, the Secretary mentioned other modes of rail transportation, or should I say transportation. In our case, we are about to embark in a modernization of our rail system. The Port of Palm Beach owns its own train system. I get to, if I wish, I get to play with the choo-choo. I've done that once, but I'm not supposed to tell anybody. We do have that ability that we actually go out into the FEC yard, rail yards close by, and bring in containers that originated somewhere up in the United States, most likely out of Jacksonville, and late in the afternoon, we get to reverse that. That system has just about reached capacity, and in my estimation, that is the system, the rail system, that will make the difference for the Port of Palm Beach in years to come. As I mentioned, we are in the process of modernizing it, and with the plan that are in place, I think that we'll be able to double the capacity of rail activity here at the Port of Palm Beach. That will have a very positive output, not only for the port, but also the surrounding areas. Keep in mind, the more cargo that we get out of I-95 and into the rail, the easier to commute and certainly less pollution. So therefore, I'm looking forward to starting this project as soon as we possibly can. With that, Larry, I'll turn it back to you. And of course, if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to attempt to answer.
Well, Manny, thank you very much for that summary. I'm just very impressed with Secretary Tebow and yourself with the huge organizations that you have. That you're very nimble in terms of changes that you're making, and I think that's a theme that we're going to be discussing for the 3 topics that we have coming up for logistics. So I commend you for that thinking and leadership on your parts. I want to move on to discuss 3 aspects of distribution logistics in our county that are vital to maintaining economic stability and future growth. And for each topic, what we're going to do is I want to explore the effects of the pandemic, number 1, and number 2, what learnings we've got now for improving our resiliency for these types of episodes. The first is disruption in supply chain from procurement to last mile. What's happening in the movement of goods from raw materials to final consumer. The second is labor availability and allocation and issues related to that and how that's been disrupted. And the third, operational changes in warehouse environments. And to help explore these topics, I've got 2 experts in the field. Dale Kloss is a co-owner of Distribution by Air, which is a global freight forwarding and logistics company, and Chris Carr is the director of sales for South Florida for Andersen Material Handling. And we're going to start with the first item, which is a supply chain disruption. So Dale, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. I mean, it's clear that a significant challenge for businesses in Florida is the increased lead times in first mile transportation from China and other countries for raw material sourcing to get over here in the first place. Can you talk a little bit about some context in terms of freight volumes and transit times over the previous few months compared with early 2020 and previously, and what that means for our businesses in Florida and with your knowledge of what's happening around the country?
Hey, Larry, thank you very much. You know, what we're seeing obviously is due to the passenger travel, obviously almost denied in most countries, a real pull out of tin from the air. There's a lot of less aircraft flying. And therefore, what is flying internationally to move cargo in is limited to what ports those airlines are serving. What's really keeping most of the international airlines alive, and even the domestic ones on the international side, is basically the government mail. As an example, when mail goes from the United States to, say, Germany, it gets put on one of the U.S. flag carriers, United, Delta, going over there, depending on which carrier, which location, and vice versa. So mail coming in from Germany would come in on Lufthansa. So these flights, typically when you got passengers flying out of 20 to 25 major airports, the mail is going out on all those airlines, and they're moving. Right now, because of no passenger travel, the airlines themselves have reduced services, and what they're doing is they're flying into maybe 5 or 6 airports regionally to distribute their mail and to move whatever passengers they do have. So what happens is that where typically you might have had a flight from Hong Kong to Miami by a carrier, they might not have enough product and enough mail, and they decided that Atlanta is a better served hub, because from Atlanta they can truck out the mail or what they need to the southeast. So what happens is not only do you have less air capacity, you now have the fact that you can no longer fly directly into Miami and have that transit time cut down by just clearing customs and making a local delivery up and down the coast, like, you know, Palm Beach down to Key West. Now the product has to come into Atlanta, from there be cleared, and then move via a line haul program down into Miami, then dispersed from Miami to the local delivery points. So even all things being equal, you're adding anywhere from 2 to 4 days just on transit if all space was equal. Now, obviously, less air means less space. And so as we're buying the space out, we have to wait for flights to when there's a departure and when they have volume to accept the cargo. So what we're seeing is typically international general cargo used to move at a 3 to 5 day transit time. We're now seeing on average 6 to 8, and in some cases as long as 9 to 10. And it's not really about the flying time. It's about just waiting in the queue for space on the aircraft to come this way. And of course that does affect cost, because now the airlines know, hey, we've got limited space. We've seen, you know, some costs go up 3, 4, 5-fold even just during this and the COVID-19 and all the extra precautions you got to take now that adds cost on, like having things wiped down, extra employees to clean stuff and do all that, just adds cost and time to the movement of traffic.
Yeah, it's interesting that happening and those delays, which we're all seeing, and you know, it's compounded by the fact that there are different levels of lockdown in different countries, and of course we all know what's going on in our country. You know, from city to city, county to county, every municipality or state, and the differences in terms of what's open and what's closed. So, for example, China was locked down first, and we were open. Now it's kind of reversed. How are you juggling all of that in terms of the traffic that you're seeing and your customers and the way that they're ordering? And what I want to get to from this question following on is, what's going to happen for Q4?
Well, Obviously, the problem, like you said, has been shifted to the fact that we've sort of have a out of control COVID situation. As states are going up and down, closing, like you said, and trying to predict how we get that under control I wouldn't even know how to begin to even assess that. What we see though is some of the carriers overseas, because their businesses are opening up, that they're able to put some more lift into the air. We have seen slight increases from the airlines in flights. The same thing with the vessels overseas. But we still have, a lot of the problem is even when the airlines are flying, their facilities are working on shorter hours. So as an example, where Lufthansa used to be open until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night to accept cargo, they're closing at 4 p.m. So you have that little backlog of trying to get your driver over to the airline to get the cargo out of the airline or to drop cargo off at the airline, because with their revenue being down, they're obviously, minimizing their hours. And, we're also seeing from the trucking standpoint, like as an example, South Florida is such an inbound market. And like was said before, you had so much trucks coming down here bringing product, not just for the Caribbean that really lives off the United States product, but Central America and South America. It's a big market for product going down there. So with less traffic coming down here, less equipment coming down here, there's less available equipment even just being around in South Florida. So what we're seeing is trying to find somebody going northbound. We have to wait for some volume. And a lot of the carriers here, like I said, they survive on their inbound. They don't have, we're not an outbound market. We don't have a lot of manufacturing here. So we're sort of an odd situation in South Florida compared to a lot of the other country, is we really survive on the inbound market, which you don't see as much in a lot of places.
Right.
And as the Caribbean and South America have, curtailed, like you said, the cruise business is a big portion of it. But even in general, just the general tourist business, people flying over there that aren't there now to buy supplies, have really put a strain on the capacity. We're really just trying to monitor it and move along with it. We do see some expanded lift, like I said. Hopefully, if the cruise ships can start sailing, we might even see a little more lift on that. And that's really the big driver down here. The cruise line industry is going to drive a lot of what we see down here, at least from this marketplace. And in the rest of the countries, here, Los Angeles, there's lift moving. But again, it's just a matter of finding space.
Right. Thanks. I think that if we're looking at the uncertainty that we're seeing and experiencing, it's often difficult to come up with learnings to help guide us for the future. But I want to try to pick some out, and one is the necessity for flexibility. For example, localized inventory for speed. So even in Palm Beach County, Amazon is starting sort of local delivery hubs in different markets. There's one that's going to be built in Boca Raton later this year, for example. And I think that is a process that many manufacturers or many companies are employing to be closer to the customer and to have that speed and convenience. I think another is diversification of the carrier network. So you may be seeing that as well, Dale, and perhaps Secretary Tebow or Manny, you can speak to that as well. Companies or your customers that are looking to multiple modes or other opportunities to make sure that their goods are moving within the supply chain, rather than relying on the traditional solutions that they have in the past. And the third, I think, learning here is, and that's been discussed, is sort of a repatriation to the United States of certain industries or certain products that are deemed to be of national importance, and developing that sort of vertical structure from manufacture through storage and handling and distribution, that we can again revive in our county and our state to facilitate that. So Dale, what do you see in terms of closing off this portion of the discussion?
Well, a lot of these supply chains are not easy to just simply uproot and redo as the problem. I mean, in a lot of cases, even though the product may come from China to the United States or Europe to the United States, some of the raw materials that are used to manufacture that product is moving around in a supply chain that now would have to come directly to the United States, as opposed to maybe going from India to China, or from the Middle East to Europe, depending on or Africa to Europe, depending on where the raw materials come from. So it definitely would be challenging to uproot those kind of supply chains so quickly. They're really embedded in so much that you really got to change almost every aspect of it. Not just a matter of saying, hey, we're going to open up a factory here, but where do you get your raw materials from? And then how fast do you get those raw materials here, and how fast can you make the changes to whatever is necessary to get that product moving. So it's not an impossible change. I just don't think it's something you can look at and say, hey, we can snap this up in 6 months.
Right.
It took a long time. I've been doing this since '81. It took a long time for manufacturing to change from the domestic travel, from moving product around, to the overseas travel. It didn't happen in 1 or 2 years. It took 20, 30 years to do that. I'm not saying we couldn't be faster to bring that back. Obviously, we can make a priority to it. But there's a lot involved that would require a lot of changes that I don't know would happen so quickly, especially, again, with the pandemic going on as it is.
Right.
I don't know how much changes we could make in that field right off the bat. But I'm not. I'm in the transportation. I'm moving it. I'm not saying who's gonna set up and change the supply chain from the suppliers.
Right. Secretary Tebow, what do you think in terms of diversification of modes of transit and finding other solutions to traditional problems?
Well, what we've seen, and I'm sure many of you read, that, for example, the aviation industry, who has a very small portion of their overall movement of items is cargo, right? But they've seen an increase in that, or they have increased that amount during this period because obviously they've had less passengers, right? And they're trying to keep planes moving, they're trying to keep things going, at least some revenue stream coming in. So they're diversifying a little bit, even in the short term, of trying to move more cargo. I got to believe that there was probably a period of time that there was air cargo that they were asked to deliver in the past that they just didn't have the room for because they were all full with passenger cargo and other things that were taking most of their time, right, or most of their space. So in the short term, they've kind of changed their model. I got to believe that the aviation industry, especially the airlines, are revisiting where's the future going to rely for them. Mm-hmm. We've seen, for example, business travel, right? They know that the business traveler and the long distance trips and the last minute trips, all that's going to change because of what we're doing here, for example, with the Zoom meeting, right? In a permanent sense. So they're having now to think, what other product line, what other lines do we need to get involved with? So I expect they'll start to step up a little bit more and start saying more of a yes on delivering cargo than the no maybe in the past. Because there are some routes that either the trucking industry or the freight rail industry may have been saturated and couldn't get any more. And so I think you'll see some of those changes coming as a result of the pandemic.
Right. Good. Thank you for that. I'm going to move on now, just in the interest of time, to operational changes in warehouse environments. So just as we're seeing changes and rethinking in terms of our external supply chains, things are happening inside our own buildings that are absolutely affecting the ability of our supply chains to operate efficiently. And Chris, I'm going to involve you in this portion of the discussion. Obviously, we're all familiar with the CDC guidelines and everything that we're following as a community to stay safe and how those guidelines may conflict with actual our ability within a warehouse environment to keep things moving. And we're sort of in a unique situation in that safety trumps efficiency in many with this new type of this new type of situation that we're in. I'll give you some examples in our own facilities where we're minimizing warehouse technicians that are in any aisle at any one time. That may not be the most efficient way to get things done, but you know, our systems are manipulating or modifying behavior in order to keep that distance, or that you know, awkward shapes or packaging that might have been light enough for two people to move themselves. They're not doing that anymore. We're having material handling equipment come up and lift that and take that away so we can avoid that close contact. So it just seems, Chris, that the rules that we did not question previously in terms of our best practices, in terms of running an organization, are I'm not going to say being thrown out the window, but for dramatic effect, I'm going to say that. And you know, it's that type of what I wanted to talk to you about or get your viewpoint on is how your customers are breaking those rules to continue operations. What's going on in South Florida, in your market, and maybe, you know, your other clients around the country, and with COVID-19, and maybe how Florida differs, or Palm Beach County differs from other markets that you're working in with regard to these operational changes that we're seeing.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'd just like to touch in on the industry itself first in South Florida, and kind of mirror what everybody else mentioned. Is we've seen a huge downtick in cruise line, you know, distributing goods to cruise lines. But on the flip side of that, we've seen a huge uptick in retail or in grocery distribution for food distribution. But we've also seen a huge downtick in restaurant retail food distribution. So it's kind of all over the board right now. But just as a whole, wanted to give you a good grasp of what the market looks like for South Florida, but it mirrors exactly what everybody else is kind of saying is, you know, the retail side of the industry is way down. Just to touch in on what Andersen Material Handling is, we're an electric forklift distributor for the Raymond Corporation. The Raymond Corporation is part of the Toyota Material Handling of North America group. We are experts in material handling, and we also provide engineered systems to warehouses to help them distribute goods better and more efficiently and safer. As far as COVID, we've seen, obviously everybody is affected by this. Most of our customers have really just implemented different procedures for entering the building. They are now doing questionnaires at the front of the building. They're taking temperature at the front of the building. And then if you have an outside vendor coming into a warehouse, you'll have a wristband to identify them as they've been screened. Some companies are doing a strict policy that says that there are no visitors in the house at all. We're having people that any sign of sickness not allowed in the building, whether they're an employee or an outside vendor. I'd say 95% of the businesses that we go into, people have masks on even while they're operating a forklift, and are using social distancing practices. And then on the employee side, there's a requirement to do daily records of your temperature, and then if you have any symptoms. So kind of a piece of contact tracing there. And then for employees and vendors, again, there's PPE for everybody: masks, gloves, sanitizers, cleaners, contactless paperwork. We've implemented that actually at Andersen Material Handling, where we don't allow them to actually hand a pen and pad over to sign an invoice or an agreement of any kind. Everything's done electronically. And in the warehouse, actually, we've seen companies implement and actually ask us to design and install trucker cages to kind of keep people quarantined or keep people out from actually moving into the building. That's actually, we've seen a huge uptick in that, and actually designing and installing TROAX cages, they call them, I'm sure you guys have seen them, truck driver cages to kind of keep them separated from their employees in the warehouse. Also safety gates for dock doors. You don't realize how many dock doors are usually left open, and people will just sneak in, or truck drivers will jump up. So we've seen a huge uptick in securing those doors in warehouses. So that kind of covers what we've seen in the warehouse itself. As far as how COVID is delaying projects, because I feel like that's a big piece of it, is you have one person that either has a scare or tests positive, everything shuts down, as you can imagine. So we've seen installations get pushed out 1 or 2 weeks because of those scares, and it's had a ripple effect on coordination and kind of goes down the line. So you move one thing in a construction project, which is really on the engineered systems side of it, is what we do. It's more of a construction project than anything. It has a significant effect on the timeline and coordinating everything else that goes with it. And then I just want to touch in on one other item that I think it's affected everybody on this call, is the financial effects. So we've had companies that have asked for deferred payments because they've been affected significantly, especially on the cruise line side, by the COVID virus. So we've seen deferred payments. We've seen even companies ask to cancel or hold orders for a certain amount of time. And instead of companies purchasing new equipment, they're either looking at used or extending the lease on their existing equipment. And then also a huge uptick in rentals. So I know that's a lot, but I feel like that's our current landscape, and that's kind of how we are seeing our market right now, Larry.
Chris, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And I think we're all experiencing that on some level, and it speaks to the ability of us to really communicate and cooperate with each other as we get through this. I want to talk about one more thing. I'm conscious of the time here, and that is the third and final topic here in terms of labor availability and allocation. And I think Secretary Tebow, you can speak directly to this for a moment. And I don't want to give the impression that everything is down. I'm going to give you a couple stats here. Migration to online retails reached levels of adoption this year that were forecast prior to the pandemic to be achieved within the next 6 years. So an example of that, total online spending in May of this year hit $82.5 billion. That's up 77% year over year. Okay. Another fact is consumers spent over $153 billion online, many of that in Florida, in April and May this year, and it was 7% higher than the holiday season last year. It was $142.5 billion spent in November and December last year, $153 billion in normally slower months, April and May of this year. This is the sort of upheaval that's going on in our markets, where some companies are struggling mightily or failing, and others are doing better than they ever have before. And that in itself is sort of a summary of what's happening with our labor markets, and the inability to quickly equalize that situation from a human resources standpoint, as well as a supply chain standpoint. So and that's separate from the HR issues that we're all affecting in terms of flexible policies, changing the way we work with our employees and our teams. Secretary Tebow, what can you talk about, from the state point of view in terms of this sort of situation that we're experiencing, and how we're going to come out of this successfully?
So I mentioned earlier, Larry, that one of the statistics that we were tracking when we saw reduced traffic on our highways was the truck traffic didn't change significantly. We were seeing still goods getting to market. I think even Chris mentioned it a little bit about the grocers. I got to believe Publix is doing quite well financially. because it's just people still had to get food, right? Things had to get to market. And of course, there were other goods that needed to get to market. So there are different aspects that still kept moving forward. And so in a trucking sense, you know, that's why I would tell our team that the revenues that we receive is not directly related to traffic volumes, right? Because the revenues that the truck industry pay is related to gas tax or tolling or whatever is at a different rate than it is by the car, right? So it's not a one-to-one ratio. So I think you're going to still see some of those significant uses of those movements throughout the different areas. I think you were alluding to a little bit about labor, Larry, and about, you know, availability of labor. We were, you know, pre-pandemic, and you probably knew this, we knew this statewide, we had so much, we had more need than we had availability as relates to resources, right, especially in the labor market. What we did notice, as I mentioned earlier, our construction projects kept going. We didn't stop them. We kept moving forward. But that industry, because of other industries holding off on some projects, were able to take from that pool to support this pool. So the skilled labor, carpenters, all those were now coming from here, maybe on the vertical construction and helping out with the horizontal construction. And it helped fill in the valleys, right, of where we needed some resources. That may stay for a period of time, and then obviously it'll start to change again. So those are all the different things. We just literally sent a workforce development report to the legislative leadership and the governor just a few weeks ago. We were required to do this by the legislature earlier, pre-pandemic. It just happened that it actually provided a great deal of information on how we're developing our workforce to help meet the needs, at least in the transportation sector. And with that, Larry, I need to sign off for my next meeting. So thank you for having me here, by the way.
I appreciate your participation. Thank you, Secretary Tebow. We're
Take
right
care,
behind
everyone.
you. I do have one question that came in for you, Manny. If cruises are barred from sailing until October 1st, do you think they'll survive?
Good question. Our cruise line, I can only tell you that they are doing everything they can to stay afloat, no pun intended. Other cruise lines are beginning to see how they are a lot better. I'm sure there's a better word out there, but they seem to be consolidating their own product. You hear of Carnival Cruise Line selling 12 of their cruise ships. Who's buying them? I couldn't tell you. Understand that Royal Caribbean may be in the same position. NCL is desperately looking for outside financing. They might have already received that. So can they survive? I'm sure they can, because it's such a beacon of business. In other words, there's such a demand for cruising. But unfortunately, the United States is not allowing, obviously, given the CDC guidelines, but also keep in mind that the countries of destination may not be receiving them. Real quick, I do know that most of the Latin American seaports are having an even tougher time than we are. And the reason for that is they heavily, and I mean extremely, depend on cruising for their own economic impact. So my answer is yes, it will survive. I think we're going to be seeing a much smaller cruise activity than we have seen in the past. But it's just a matter of time before it just goes back to the normal volume. So keep your fingers crossed. We cannot, South Florida cannot be without cruising activity. Really, it is. We ride and we depend on it very, very heavily.
Right. Thank you for that. I'm going to, at this point, sum up the meeting. We're right at our stop time by thanking our participants, Secretary Tebow, Executive Director Almira, Chris Carr, Dale Kloss. I want to thank the Business Development Board leadership, including Kelly Smallridge. And, in closing, it's a stable supply chain is vital to our economy in Palm Beach County, as Manny just mentioned, and procurement and distribution, labor allocation, and operational considerations we discussed are are linked, and they require a comprehensive examination by our industry to develop practices, to improve our resilience. I think these forums, these discussions really help become part of the solution, in that we are a really intertwined ecosystem here in Palm Beach County and in Florida, and we really need this type of discourse and this dialogue to share best practices and move beyond this current situation and continue to thrive. So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating today, and have a safe and happy rest of your week. Kelly, did you want to close out, or shall we leave it at that?
Yes, Larry, thank you so much again for your leadership. And I think that today's discussion was healthy for us all to understand the dynamic impact of this industry on Palm Beach County, the challenges that are currently faced, and like you said, some opportunities that are out there of companies that are doing better than ever. Again, we do have a task force, and it is chaired by or led by Gary Hines and Larry. So if any of you are in the logistics and distribution industry and want to participate, please contact Gary Hines. We also have a website, bdb.org, where we are placing a lot of the good information regarding this industry on our site. So again, thank you all for participating, and we look forward to having future forums like this in a couple of months. Larry, again, thank you for your great leadership. You've done a tremendous job in leading this task force. Everyone have a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.